Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Francophile Reader. So, we are in the holiday season, and I thought I would give you some recommendations of books that you can read. Most of them are classics, but some of them are more modern books. These are the kinds of books that I love, that I find to be very Christmassy, gets me into the holiday spirit. There's always a little bit of magic, or often a little bit of magic, not always. I like to have a little bit of darkness in my holiday reads. So I'm going to give you 10 recommendations, and hopefully one of them sounds appealing to you. Let's begin. So my first book is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I recommend the translation by Keith Harrison, but J.R.R. Tolkien also did a translation that I have read. For me, Keith Harrison's translation was my favorite book of 2017, I believe. It's a phenomenal translation. Definitely read it out loud. So the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, or Sir Gawain, as a lot of English scholars will say, takes place on New Year's Day in Camelot, and this Green Knight arrives and challenges a knight to strike him once with an axe. And then in return, the knight, after a year and a day, 366 days later, would have to allow the Green Knight to strike him once with an axe. And so the knight who takes up the challenge is our protagonist, Gawain, or Gawain. And so Gawain strikes at the Green Knight's head, but instead of him dying, he simply picks up his head and gallops away. And so now Gawain is so worried. Along the way, there are a series of temptations that Gawain encounters. It is very magical. It's got that little bit of a darkness, because of course Gawain is now going to be struck with an axe, and he's concerned that he will not be able to pick up his own head afterward. It's absolutely magical. I read it actually on New Year's Day, so if you want to wait till New Year's Day, it's like the perfect time, but you can obviously read it at any point. Since we're in the chivalric theme, I thought I would give you a few more chivalric romance recommendations. The second one is Orlando Furioso by Ariosto. I made an entire series of videos about me reading Orlando Furioso for the first time. I will link one of the videos below. But Orlando Furioso is just a number of different interconnected stories. There are romances, but also there are some magical creatures. There is Melissa, who is a sorceress. She gives a ring to Rinaldo, who is one of the major characters in the story. Rinaldo is in love with this girl named Angelica, who doesn't love him back. And there's other characters who are trying to escape danger, escape a wizard. There's this wizard who has imprisoned some people. There's a flying hippogriff. At one point, the characters go to the moon. It is fantastic. It's a large epic, so if you want a big book to get into that is magical and that is a classic, I definitely recommend Orlando Furioso. 3. Aucassin and Nicolette. There are English translations of this work available. Aucassin and Nicolette is a 13th century poem about Aucassin, who is a man, and Nicolette, who is a woman. They're both in love with each other, but Aucassin is supposed to be a knight. He's supposed to be a warrior. Instead, he hates war and he hates fighting. He'd rather just be in love with Nicolette. Nicolette, on the other hand, is not a very feminine character, and she really displays a lot of traits that are coded as masculine at this time period. And in fact, at one point, she disguises herself as a male troubadour. This poem is a parody on chivalric romances. The reason why the romance is looked down upon by the families of the two characters is that Nicolette is supposed to be a Saracen and Aucassin is a Christian. So Saracen is kind of Muslim. It's basically the other, okay? And so they can't fall in love with each other. At one point, there's also a battle with baked goods. So it's hilarious, but also really heartwarming. I definitely recommend it. And it's a fascinating work. Just in its construction, it's a lyric poem. So there's a lot about song, and it's supposed to kind of harken back to the southern French troubadour tradition. 4. Yvain, The Knight of the Lion by Chrétien de Troyes. So Chrétien de Troyes is the author of the Grail legend, but he also wrote a number of other stories. At some point, I would like to do a monthly read-along of Chrétien de Troyes, or where at least, you could try to read 1 or 2 stories in the month. Maybe next year. But Yvain follows a knight, Yvain, he's an Arthurian knight, who is tasked with defeating a knight named Esclado in response to a request from his cousin. There is a magic fountain, or rather it's a magic stone. So when the water from the fountain is poured on the stone, it causes violent storms. There is a lion that is, befriends Yvain. There's a dragon. There are giants. He's having to save women from giants. I mean, it is delightful. Definitely perfect if you like these kind of magical chivalric romances. Okay, so that's that with the chivalric romances. And number 5 is La Peau de Chagrin, which is translated as The Magic Skin by Balzac. So Honoré de Balzac, 19th century author. I have made a video about Balzac and the works that I have read. I do mention The Magic Skin, but I think that this one is the most appropriate for the holiday season. So it's about a man who buys this magic skin from a curiosity shop, and the magic skin fulfills any wish that he may have, but in return, he loses years from his life. And this work is a social commentary as we get to see this man and his circle of friends and all of that. It's really, really good. Balzac is always a brilliant prose writer. If you want to read something other than Dickens, I think Balzac's Magic Skin might be right for you. 6. The Lives of Christopher Chant by Diana Wynne Jones. So I have had a mixed experience with Diana Wynne Jones' works, but The Lives of Christopher Chant, I think, really has withstood the test of time. I mean, I read this book, it's actually the second in a series, but you can read it first, years ago, and then I reread it recently, I think within the past year, and it was just as magical as I remember it being. So Christopher Chant can enter into alternative universes, alternative worlds, but he somehow keeps getting himself killed. Now, thankfully, he has 9 lives, but he only has 9 lives, and because he keeps getting himself killed, there's a concern that he may never come back from these alternative worlds. So yeah, if you like portal stories, I think this one's perfect. 7, a book that I read early this year, which is one of my favorite books of 2019, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. This is a monster of a book. It is huge. And I had the hardcover version. I had to switch to the Kindle version because it was crushing my legs, but it is fantastic. So we follow 2 magicians, Mr. Norrell first, and then his student, Jonathan Strange. Now, this is a historical fantasy set during the Napoleonic Wars, particularly the Battle of Waterloo, so there is that element. But basically, in the beginning of the story, we learn that there is this magic society, but the magicians who make up the society do not do practical magic. They just study magic theoretically, and in fact, they believe that practical magic is not possible. But Mr. Norrell claims that it is. And along the way, he makes a deal with this ghost character in exchange for the resurrection of a woman. So basically, this woman dies, he makes a deal with this ghost, and then Mr. Norrell is able to resurrect this woman. So you have that, but then also you have Jonathan Strange, who has a very different vision of what magic should be, how it should be used, and ultimately this ends in a duel. If you want a magical book to get into that's a bit dark, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is fantastic. 8. Faust Part 1. Part 2 is very philosophical, and I don't think entirely necessary. Faust is written by Goethe, and Faust Part 1 follows our protagonist, Faust, who is a scientist, but he's just really depressed and in fact on the point of suicide, and he wants to know the world, and he feels like he just can't. And he makes a deal with Mephistopheles, signs it with his blood, and Mephistopheles promises that he will give Faust anything that he wants, but he doesn't tell him, at least not directly, at what cost. And it is fantastic. I love Mephistopheles. He is a fantastic demon. He's just an amazing character. And there's also a romance between Faust and a girl named Margaret. So you just get to see all kinds of crazy things happen. There are otherworldly elements. And of course, because Mephistopheles is such a fantastic character, is really, really funny what he will do to Faust and his friends. 9. Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot. While we're talking about temptations, Murder in the Cathedral is based off of the murder of Thomas Becket in 1172, and he was the Archbishop of Canterbury. And this is such an interesting play, first of all, because it's in verse, and it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's one of those poems that you just want to read out loud. There are these 3 tempters, and the tempters do not tempt Thomas Becket to avoid martyrdom, but rather to embrace martyrdom for unchristian reasons. Thomas Becket is presented as this power-hungry person who wants to have temporal power, and so he thinks about what might happen if he were martyred. And it is so good. I think it's just such an interesting commentary about power and about martyrdom and all of this. I really love the play, and it has that magical element to it, or at least this otherworldly element to it, all while being a very serious story. And finally, Hercule Poirot's Christmas by Agatha Christie. This was my first Agatha Christie I ever read, and I loved it. It takes place on Christmas, and I know that murder mysteries on Christmas are really popular. I wanted to recommend this one because it was my first Agatha Christie. We follow this multi-millionaire who has this family gathering on Christmas, and we come to learn that he is changing his will, or at least the family members overhear that he is changing his will, modifying it, and then he is found murdered, his throat slit in his bedroom. So who did it? And because this book really got me into Agatha Christie, I really recommend it. So yeah, these are my 10 books. So let me know if you've read any of these, or if you have any plans on reading any of these in the holiday season. Thank you everybody for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.